Here you see the Tim Geithner, Treasury Secretary, playback. He met with executives, with experts on executive pay moments ago. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We had a very useful discussion with a group of national experts on broad compensation issues. We're here to talk about how we can encourage helpful reforms in compensation practice across corporate America, but in particular in the financial sector. Whereas we've seen we had a financial crisis, which although was caused by many things, there were clearly some aspects of compensation which contributed to the extent of risk-taking we saw across the financial sector. We are very pleased to be here today with Mary Schapiro and with Dan Tarullo. We had a good discussion about broad principles and best practices and standards that we hope will guide evolution and practice going forward. Among those are a few, and I'll just cite a few examples. I think there's a lot of consensus you want to see compensation plans better measure and reward performance. We want to see compensation structured to better account for the time horizon of risk. We'd like compensation practice to better reinforce, be better aligned by sensible risk management practice. And we'd like to see better transparency and accountability, frankly, about compensation practices. Looking forward, we are going to support giving the SEC legislative authority for say-on-pay legislation, and to make sure that compensation committees are fully independent. We'll be very supportive of Chairman Shapiro's efforts to encourage greater disclosure in these areas, important device for helping encourage better evolution in practice. Beyond the two legislative proposals I just mentioned, say-on-pay and authority to make compensation committees independent, we don't see a need for further legislation. But I do want to highlight the initiative that Chairman Bernanke and the bank supervisors undertook beginning last fall to lay out broad practices, standards, principles for how supervisors in the financial sector, banks in particular, should examine compensation practice to make sure that they are reinforcing rather than undermining risk management frameworks. And of course, that's critically important given the critical role the financial sector plays in the economy and the particular challenges we all face in trying to bring better.
All right, looks like we had some technical difficulties, but we're going to go back. Are we going to go back? There we go.
Proposing an ongoing government role in setting policy on compensation. We do not believe it's appropriate for the government to set caps on compensation. We are not going to prescribe detailed prescriptive rules for compensation. We think all those things would be ineffective, could be counterproductive in some ways. And we're going to try to find the right balance looking forward. We'll find a device for trying to assess progress over time so we can encourage further progress and reform. I think there's broader recognition that practice has to change. It'll be easier to agree on principles and standards than it will be to apply those in ways that achieve constructive, practical changes, but we want to reinforce that process. And I'd like to let Chairwoman Schapiro and Dan Tarullo say a few things before we end.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I really want to thank all the participants who came today to share their insights and their time with us. It was enormously helpful from my perspective. You know, at the SEC, our role has not been to set pay scales or cap compensation. Our role is really to protect investors by ensuring that they have all the information that they need to make sound investment decisions, whether those decisions involve casting your votes or making a decision to buy or sell a stock. And over the years, the Commission has evolved its compensation-related disclosures, and we are faced yet again, given all the events of the last several years, with the task and the challenge of making sure that our compensation disclosure rules are serving investors as well as they possibly can. So we'll be looking at a number of things over the course of the next couple of months. While our proposals, which are very much in flux still, would not dictate particular compensation decisions, we think they will compel companies to carefully analyze what conduct and behavior they're incenting, particularly with respect to risk-taking through their compensation programs. So we are thinking carefully about proposals that would give better disclosure about how a company and its board manage risks, about how a company's overall compensation approach affects shareholders, incentive structures that rewarded short-term risk-taking without really taking into account the long-term impacts on the company are clearly widely believed to have really contributed to the economic crisis. We're going to look at disclosure about potential conflicts of interest on the part of compensation consultants so that both compensation committees and investors can better assess the advice that consultants provide. And finally, we're looking at providing greater disclosure about director nominees, including their experience and their qualifications to serve on the board or on particular board committees, and also about the kind of leadership structure and governance structure a particular board has selected for its company. These, along with our recent proposals with respect to facilitating shareholder access to the proxy, we think will be important to the sort of foundation of investor protection and disclosure. So like the Secretary and the Federal Reserve Board, we're very much committed to addressing executive compensation issues. I think they're very important, particularly at this time in our economy, and we're looking forward to working with all of you further on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schapiro. Dan.
Thanks. I'd like to thank Secretary Geithner for arranging this very interesting discussion this morning. The Federal Reserve's interest in compensation issues is grounded in our statutory mandate to ensure the safety and soundness of the financial institutions that we regulate. Many of those firms have acknowledged that compensation practices contributed to the financial crisis. So we are now directly focused on promoting compensation practices for executives and employees that do not create incentives for behavior that puts the firm and the financial system at risk. And we're currently developing proposals that are going to further advance this goal beyond the starting point the Secretary mentioned a moment ago. I found today's discussion very helpful in illuminating how our specific interests in this subject fit into and are informed by, really, the broader issues of corporate compensation policies that many of the participants here brought some very interesting insights on today. So thank you again, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you all for coming.